The Home Depot has up to 35% off select appliances like Samsung, ranked #1 in customer satisfaction. Shop the mega capacity 3-door French door refrigerator with 4 types of ice to chill your drink faster. Or the 5-burner electric range with no preheat air fry for healthier, crispy food all in your oven. Right now, get up to 35% off select appliances at the Home Depot. How doers get more done. Visit jdpower.com/awards for more details. Pricing valid January 9th through January 29th. U.S. only. See store online for details.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means. That's Stefan Krajisnik, and that's Andrew Gillis. They both have hats on again. You guys can't see them, but they both have hats on again. I don't have a hat on because I'm in my home. I don't wear a hat in my home, unlike apparently these two do consistently. It's fine. It's whatever. That's not actually what we're here to talk about. I just want you guys to know what people look like when we do pods that you're not going to see us in. Anyway, Ohio State won a national championship, Stefan. I don't know where you've been for the past couple of months here, but that did happen. But while you were doing that, while you were traveling from Columbus to Los Angeles to Columbus to Dallas to Columbus to Atlanta, Ohio State was in the midst of putting together its 2025 roster, which means losing some players. That meant gaining some players. Obviously, there's a large handful of guys who are just graduating and going off to the NFL draft. But some numbers for you. 11 players lost to the portal, and they bring in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in the portal. So 11 guys out, 6 people in. So I do wonder where their scholarship numbers are going to be. But they also lost an important 7th person. Jim Knowles is now the defensive coordinator at Penn State, leaving Ohio State after 3 years. Stefan and I did a video about that where I think we broke down the just like practical stuff of, okay, hey, where's Ryan Day going to look for a defensive coordinator? How does this impact some things? What did Jim Knowles do what he did? Let's have an extended version of that conversation now, because you did a post on cleveland.com/OSU. Ohio State football is looking for a defensive coordinator. Who will Ryan Day hire? Go read that on cleveland.com/OSU. I want you to be Ryan Day right now. You put together a list. You proceeded to exclude one of the people I texted you to put on the list, which meant you probably looked it up and said, Stephen, that's not even a reasonable thing to ask. Which, I mean, listen, I don't know. Football's weird. I watched Tony Alford walk out the door the week after spring football started, and Carlos Loughlin's here. So who knows? Bill Belichick is coaching the North Carolina Tar Heels. Anything can happen. But you are Ryan Day. Who would you hire? It's knowing everybody would say yes. Realistic people, obviously. Everybody would say yes. Who are you calling first?
Well, in that case, changes things up a little bit. I think my first call is Jeff Hafley. I think he's an outstanding coordinator in the NFL, and based on what NFL coordinators make, Ohio State could probably pay him more than whatever the Packers are paying him. Now, obviously, that if Ohio State came in there, I'm sure the Packers would raise their price a bit, and we'd go back and forth a little bit. But that would be my first call. I think Hafley is one of the best coordinators in the game. My problem with that on the counterflip is he someone who's going to be, an NFL head coach in the next few years? Is that the path that he prefers to go on? It's hard to get guys to come back to the college ranks. I think that was the big thing that we harped on when, Vrabel's name started getting tossed around. It's like, dude, that guy wants to coach in the NFL. Like, he just got a job with the New England Patriots. Like, let's be real here. So Hafley would be my first call, and if he said yes, I'd take him in a heartbeat. I think that highly of him as a defensive coordinator. If I want to be more realistic here, I think Matt Guerrieri is probably the best move in terms of promoting him, in terms of stability, continuity. It's kind of a weird timeline of when you're losing your defensive coordinator here, right? Like, we see coaching changes happen a lot, kind of in December when teams are getting ready for bowl games, or, even teams that have won a national championship. It's, it's early January usually when that game's going on and you're making that transition. This is obviously the latest the college football season has gone. You're approaching February here as we're recording. and you're looking to make a change at defensive coordinator, the most logical fit to me would be taking the guy who knows Jim Knowles' defense about as well as anyone, right? Guerreri worked with him at Duke as well before, they're here at Ohio State together. Guerreri was at Ohio State in 22, spent a year at Indiana, came back to Ohio State, worked under Knowles again. I think he would be the most logical fit. I think it would keep your defense probably as similar to what we've seen the past few years as possible. I also just think he's ready. I think it's, Ryan Day could not have spoken more glowingly about him at the championship celebration on Sunday. He called him, one of the rising stars, one of the young rising stars in the industry. I think it's clear that Ohio State and Ryan Day think that this guy is going to be a very good coordinator. And, if he has ambitions of being a head coach, I'm sure that that's something that he could pursue, down the line in the future. So it's clear that Ohio State thinks highly of this guy. That's why I had him as the first name mentioned kind of on that hot board when you're kind of just throwing some names together, seeing, what would be some logical fits. That's what I think would be the most realistic move. I think Hafley would be my first call, and I make a strong. I mean, well, if everyone's saying yes, I'm calling Saban and being like, well, what are the odds? Any interest in coming back to Ohio? But if we're being somewhat realistic, I think Hafley's realistic because Vic Fangio with the Eagles is the highest paid coordinator in the NFL. He makes like $4.5 million. Mm-hmm. Well, Ohio State just offered Jim Knowles, close to $3 million to stay. Like most NFL coordinators are making about $1 million. Like we're talking about Hafley's salary probably jumping like $1 or $2 million if he were to come to Ohio State. So like the financial aspect of it makes me think that it's not unrealistic to say Hafley's an option. But based on his career path, it seems like he leans and wants to be an NFL guy, which makes me think maybe Matt Guerreri is the most logical, most realistic move here.
Obviously, Jeff Hafley and Ryan Day worked together with the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously, different sides of the ball, but I remember them telling stories about, hey, man, if we're ever head coach, I want you to come work with me. If I'm a head coach, I want you to ever come work for me. And then Ryan Day, believe it or not, became the head coach. His first coaching staff in 2019. He paired Jeff Hafley with Greg Madison, who he brought in from Michigan, but Hafley was the play caller that year. Ohio State allowed 13.7 points per game that year. That was fourth nationally. They allowed 4.13 yards per play that year. That was first nationally. They allowed 5.6 passing yards per attempt that year. That was tied with Georgia for first nationally. And they allowed 2.98 rushing yards per attempt that year. That was sixth nationally. That defense was nasty. Which is, and the thing that makes it so nasty is a lot of those same players were there the year before with a different coaching staff, and it was historically the worst defense Ohio State has ever had. Seriously, like 100 years of playing football. It was historically the worst defense. You're talking about a defense that had Chase Young, Jeff Okudah, Jordan Fuller, Malik Harrison, Davon Hamilton, Tuff Borland, Baron Browning, Pete Warner, Sean Wade, Damon Arnett. Yeah, like that defense was historically the worst in Ohio State history. And then they turned it around and had one of the best defenses in the country in Ryan Day's first year as a head coach. And then Jeff Hafley bolts for Boston College. So based on the 1 year sample size, I agree. Now, with that being said, Chase Young's not on this roster in 2025. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are not even on this roster in 2025. And that's not taking anything away from Kenyatta and Caden because they might just show out this year in a way that says, yeah, dude, we were just blocked by 2 5-star recruits who came back for their fourth year. We're fine. Now, Jeff Okudah might be on this roster this year because Jermaine Matthews is a dog. Devin Sanchez might be a dude in year one. And then you got Aaron Scott going down the list here. So Jeff Okudah might be here. Jordan Fuller is definitely on this roster, and he's better, and he wears number 2, and he's from Georgia. So you're fine there, right? I think linebacker, you see the path for how they can, if you bring in Hafley, this can be 2019 all over again. You're just not going to have a defensive end, Andrew, who gets to New York City, because that just doesn't happen every year. It happened every other year, like in 2019 and in 2021 when Aiden Hutchinson did it. And then this year, obviously, Travis Hunter did it as a defensive player. So, I mean, maybe it is every other year that it happens now. But the problem with that sample size, especially because of what it is what happened directly after that. And I think Kerry Combs gets a lot of the flack for what the defense was in 2020 and 2021. But it's not – they lost a lot of talent after 2019, right? They were playing a lot of young guys who a lot of those guys from that 2018 recruiting class didn't live up to the hype. So you mix that with Kerry Combs probably was a bad hire. But it also wasn't like he got handed a luxury car. He got handed the Chrysler that looks like the Phantom. And everybody knows what car I'm talking about. So it's hard to say Jeff Hafley was great for a year, but would he have kept that up in 2020? Would he have kept that up in 2021? Would things have actually been that much better if the play caller was different? If Jeff Hafley was different? Maybe. Maybe it would have been, maybe it wouldn't have been. But Ryan Day was running a scheme. It was a single high, cover 3, cover 1 scheme, the things that you've seen the 49ers do for a long time. They were running that. And that quickly became outdated, and that's what Jeff Hafley was good at. I haven't watched Jeff Hafley with the Packers because I don't root for a team in the NFC North, so I don't care about the Packers the same way Stefan does, which is why he's a little bit more tuned in there. But I also know that sometimes doubling back doesn't work because you doubled back, Andrew, with Kerry Combs, and it didn't work out so well the second time around. So I think I think you should call Jeff Hafley and make him tell you no. But I also am on alert for trying to pull something from the past, thinking it might work again, instead of just moving forward, because Ryan Day's a different coach than he was in 2019. He's probably got a different Rolodex of people. Andrew, who would you call?
Well, just with the Hafley thing, this is a story from Pete Thamel on January 31st, 2024. So about a year ago. Quote, this is the headline of this story. Packers hire Boston College's Jeff Hafley as defensive coordinator. And this is in the story. Quote, he wants to go coach football again in a league that is all about football, a source told ESPN. College coaching has become fundraising, NIL, and recruiting your own team and transfers. There's no time to coach football anymore. A lot of things that he went back to college for have disappeared, end quote. So
I mean, that sounds good, but also if he comes back to college, he's going to say, "Oh, I missed it. I missed being able to develop players." And they always talk about where they are, negative about where they've been. So
yeah, I get it, but I think when you had I think that there were two things there. I think Hafley was kind of the perfect target to go to the NFL because I'm not sure how much longer he was going to last at Boston College. I think he could also have wanted to get to the NFL. So I'm skeptical of Hafley.
I think we all are.
No one is saying we're not saying this. I'm asking.
No. I just wanted to throw that in there that it's not just like, hey, is it going to work on the field? It's like, hey, is he even going to answer the phone?
I mean, him and Ryan Day have a great relationship, so he would answer the phone and say no.
The person that I'm calling immediately, I'm calling him from down the hall. I'm calling Matt Guerrieri. I think that has to be your number one choice at this point, and here's why. I told this to Steven. Steven looks so disappointed that I went with a boring answer. But I told him on Sunday, before the celebration stuff, I think it's interesting. It doesn't have to necessarily be a problem, but it is interesting that if you hire a defensive coordinator, you're like, okay, Larry Johnson's your defensive line coach. James Laurinaitis is your linebackers coach. Tim Walton's your cornerbacks coach. And I said Matt Guerrieri was your safeties coach. There you go. You don't want to lose any of those position groups, and you certainly don't want to lose a Tim Walton or a James Laurinaitis. And I think when you look at what this defense has done over the last 2 years, especially, you kind of want to keep that train rolling. You want things to keep moving. And I think an in-house hire might be the best way to go about this. I think Ryan Day, when he said, rising star, I think that was purposeful. I think he knew what he was doing when he called Matt Guerrieri that. And I think if you promote Guerrieri, the vibes on that defense kind of stay the same because, yeah, you can bring in an outside hire and say, why would I need to go hire any position coaches? I've got the best position coaches in the country, but it is sometimes more difficult because it's not just scheme has to match, personalities have to match. You have to be able to work with these people and kind of understand things, imagine an outside hire walking into Tim Walton's room and saying, hey, I think you should be doing this with the corners or this with the corners. And it's just a little bit different. And, who's Tim Walton to say, what are you talking about? We just had the number 1 defense in the country for 2 years. Now you're telling me how to do my job? Like, you don't want those situations to arise. And I just think, the personalities kind of blend in that room. And I think if you promote Guerreri, you're basically just saying, look, we're going to keep this thing rolling. And we have a guy who we think is rising in this business. We have a guy who we think can handle this job, and everything's going to stay the same defensively and how we want to do things, and the vibes of this, and the room's going to stay the same. And now we only need to hire a safeties coach. I think Guerreri just makes the most sense in terms of kind of not upsetting the apple cart and kind of keeping what you got going on, which has been really good.
Yeah, but why would an outside hire upset the apple cart? And you're going to tell me, I mean, that's kind of his job. Yes, he's the boss.
Right.
Ryan Day would be hiring a head coach of the defense, which means he would be in charge of the defense.
but that's what I'm saying. You just had the number 1 defense for 2 years in a row.
Correct.
And you have great position coaches already in place. So I just think it makes sense to keep those position coaches in place and have somebody who you think is a rising star in this business take that promotion to the defensive coordinator job and keep things in line, keep things kind of as they are.
Why can't that happen still? Jim Knowles didn't have
it can. I think it can, but I think it's more difficult when you don't have somebody who's been in the room for a few years.
How? Jim Knowles didn't have a position group this year, by the way. His job was to
100%. Yeah, I'm aware of that.
So they can do that. You're talking about, promote Matt Guerreri and hire a new safeties coach. Why can't you do the other thing? Keep Matt Guerreri as the safeties coach and hire.
You can. You can. And like I said, I just think it's interesting to say, hey, new defensive coordinator person X, congratulations, you're the new defensive coordinator. You're not allowed to make any hires because they've already been made for you.
So
and that person might be like, oh, hell yeah, like I have Tim Walton and James Laurinaitis and Matt Guerreri and Larry Johnson. Why do I need to make a hire? I think in terms of allowing the system that has worked for Ohio State these last 2 years, allowing things to continue down the path that they have been rolling on, I just think it makes more sense to promote internally than it does to bring somebody in from the outside. And I think Guerreri is the right person for that.
So you think it's a bad idea for Ryan Day? No. Let me ask the question. You don't think it's a good thing for Ryan Day to hire a coordinator under the guise of, hey, new coordinator X, come run this scheme, and you don't get to make any hire? You think that is a bad thing? You don't think it's a bad thing?
I think it's risky. I think it's risky.
You think it's a crazy thing to do?
No, don't put words in my mouth. I didn't say crazy. I said I think it's risky.
You think it's risky?
I think it's risky.
You think it's risky?
I think it's riskier than promoting Guerreri. I think Guerreri is the safer choice.
You think it's risky to hire a coordinator who isn't going to have any influence over the assistant coach hires because they're already in place? You think that is risky? That's what you're saying?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So how come it worked with the offense?
Yeah. Again, it can work. I'm not saying it can't work. I just think it's risky. I just think it's risky to bring in somebody from the outside who maybe had are you going to find somebody from the outside? Let me ask you this. Are you going to find somebody from the outside who says, we're hiring you to be the boss, but you're adapting to us?
I don't think there's a world in which both those things happen. I don't think there's a world in which a coordinator says, no, I don't want to work with these guys. I want to control the defense. And he also gets hired.
Right.
Like if they call Hafley and he's like, well, I don't want to work with these assistants, then Day's going to be like, okay, we're going to promote Guerreri.
Exactly.
But also, it's not about the assistant.
But if you hire Hafley, that means he's fine with everything that's in
right.
Correct.
You set the standard, then you say this is how it's going to be, and if he says yes and you hire him, then that's not a concern anymore. He said yes to that.
Right. So it's not really a risk. It's like either you're doing it or not. And also, it's not about the assistants. Like Ryan Day's going to hire the assistants. What Jim Knowles, when he brought in Jim Knowles, Ryan Day hired the assistants. Jim Knowles brought in a lot of these support staff people. So those are where you'll see a coordinator go, hey, can we bring this GA in? Can we bring this QC in? Can we bring this guy in as an assistant defensive basketball? That's more where the regime of coordinators comes in. It's not, here are my 4 on the road assistant position coaches. No, that's the head coach's job. That's not the coordinator's job. The coordinator's job is to, adapt my philosophies to what they want to do here, and I also bring some of my support staff in, which is why Matt Guerrieri was here 2 years ago with Jim Knowles as a support staff member. And then he left, went to Indiana to be a co-coordinator, and then he came back here as a safeties coach. I don't know many situations in college football where a coordinator comes in and goes, hey, I'm going to dictate the assistant coaching hires. That's not how this works. He's the boss who still has a boss. That's Ryan Day. That's the head coach's job, to put together a staff, get 2 coordinators and go, figure it out. Here's my vision. Let's run my vision. Here are mine. Since we're in the business right now of getting people to tell you no. You know what would be really interesting? If this was happening a year from now and Wisconsin wasn't necessarily trending in the right direction. Because in the name of bringing people home, I think Luke Fickell would be more interesting if this was another year at Wisconsin where it didn't seem like it was going anywhere. The Big Ten is maybe a 3-time national champion in a row, and it seems like Wisconsin is just kind of in the middle of no man's land, and their ADs and their board of trustees and president are like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't like where we are and the landscape of all this. Let's reset this thing. That would make this interesting, because that's Ryan Day going, let's revive this man's career by bringing him home. Though Luke Fickell would probably get a head coaching job somewhere else very quickly, so he'd probably tell him no. But I would get him to tell no. You mentioned Saban. Listen, Bill Belichick is coaching the North Carolina Tar Heels right now. So I get it. Nick Saban is doing his media run, and I know he just went on the Pivot podcast. He is a very, very smart man. And I was listening to that pod and going, so that's why he kept getting these number 1 recruited classes.
You know what's funny, though? Just because we all understand how media works, the hire would happen, and we'd turn on ESPN that night, and someone would say something along the lines of, well, he hasn't been a coordinator in a while.
Yeah, they would. And we'd be like, so? He'll be okay. It'll be the same very people he was working with literally 2 weeks before he took the job. But more than likely, it's going to be Guerrieri. I think I don't always like safe with Ryan Day, because sometimes safe decisions have backfired. Safe was Kerry Combs. Safe was promoting Corey Dennis to your quarterback's coach. Safe was promoting Parker Fleming to your special teams coordinator. You know what wasn't safe? Jim Knowles. He didn't know him from squat. He just went and got the best man for the job. You know what wasn't safe? Carlos Loughlin. He didn't know him from squat. He just went out and got the best guy for the job. You can't do safe. You can't be like, oh, it's risky. Yeah, that's kind of the point, Ryan Day. It's your job. This is Ohio State. People should want to be trying to take your coordinators and trying to take your assistant coaches. That's the point. People should be trying to steal your players for $4.5 million every offseason. That is the point. It is your job to both retain your roster, retain your coaching staff, and what you lose, replace them and keep this thing rolling. Jim Knowles did a heck of a job at Ohio State for 3 years. He is not the first elite defensive coordinator to come through Ohio State's door. And he's not going to be last. It's up to Ryan Day to make sure that the next one is just as elite. And if it feels like, given where we are in the cycle, it's January 28th as people are listening to this podcast, that it's kind of difficult right now to be in a hiring state when you're trying to do a million different things. You know, Ryan Day just went on Jimmy Fallon last night, right? He's trying to be the face of the program, get ready for 2025, keep his roster together, keep his staff together. Maybe the best move is Matt Guerrieri, who does seem a little bit more prepared to do this because he's been around this program for multiple years now. He also knows Knowles' system, so it would be an easy transition. But that's risky too, because you played it safe and you didn't necessarily go get the best man for the job. You got, this is the guy down the hall. You did the least amount of legwork to get that guy. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's the risk you got to take when you're hiring coordinators, because that's the point.
Just to throw a devil's advocate, like, who's to say Guerrieri isn't the best man for the job? Like you said, you didn't get the best man.
Okay,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, right. Like maybe Guerrieri is the best man for the job,
I'm not.
They're going to tell us that, but maybe he genuinely is the best.
Maybe he is. But sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes you're right. Ryan Day saw something in Corey Dennis too, and that didn't work out. Ryan Day saw something in Parker Fleming. Parker Fleming. The first time I heard his name was the 2018 Michigan game when Chris Olave blocked the punt and Urban Meyer went, yeah, Parker Fleming came up with that. So based off of that play alone, you think the special teams might be pretty good. And it didn't work. Based off of what Kerry Combs' career here was the first time, that seemed like a pretty good hire. People were excited. I remember being it was one of the last times we were in the Woody before COVID dropped, and Gene Smith came in just to check on everything. And Kerry Combs is up there and he goes, Gene, I'm back, baby. Yeah, at the time, everything is great. Everything is supposed to work. What if Kerry Combs really is this elite coordinator? 2 years later, people are begging for him to be fired. 2 years later, he's getting removed from his responsibilities 2 games into the 2021 season. So I'm not saying that Guerreri's not going to be a good choice if that's where Ryan Day goes. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad one. I'm just saying don't just do something because it's safe. Do it because it's the right decision. Do it because that you genuinely believe that is the right man for the job. And if you genuinely believe that, I guess we'll find out.
You know, it's interesting, the domino effect, I guess, of college football. The reason Penn State had as an opening is because McGrary's boss from last year left Penn State to go to Clemson. And the reason Ohio State has an opening is because McGrary's boss this year left to take Tom Allen's job at Penn State. It's tough to make a move after a year, right? But Ohio State's also in a spot right now where I think it's probably tougher to get a completely new guy as defensive coordinator just because it's already late January. But if this team is quote unquote a bit more of a rebuild next year, you know, let's say they're 10-2 in an early playoff exit, like you have more time if you decide, hey, you know, I want to go a different route, get a new guy and completely revamp the defense. I think you give yourself some more time there.
I just think the NFL calendar is a lot different. So you can always go. Like Jim Leonard is another guy I wanted to throw out there. He spent 6 years in Wisconsin. And I think in all but 1 year, they had like a top 11 defense in the country while he was at Wisconsin. And Ryan Day.
He's like a passing game coordinator with the Broncos now.
Yeah, right now he is. And Ryan Day has a lot of respect for Jim Leonard because of their chess matches throughout the years when he was at Wisconsin. Ryan Day was obviously here as an offensive coordinator, now as a head coach. It doesn't have to be a college person.
Well,
Best, especially if you want. It seems like the way Ryan Day has structured his staff is, especially last year, and a lot of that was because Jim Knowles isn't a great recruiter, and you also had Jim Laurinaitis sitting here, and you can't afford to have him go elsewhere. You can't afford a 3-time All-American who might be an awesome assistant coach to not be an awesome assistant coach for Ohio State. I think it might be in Ohio State's best interest to put themselves in a position to where the coordinators aren't position coaches. And again, that's worked and it hasn't worked. Greg Schiano wasn't a position coach in 2018. And again, historically the worst defense in Ohio State history. Jim Knowles wasn't a position coach this year. Historically, one of the best defenses in Ohio State history statistically. So it's everything is a hit or miss. But I just wonder if Ryan Day likes the structure, regardless of who he hires, he likes this structure of his coordinators. Their job is to scheme. Their job is to build the defense. And then you have a defensive line coach, a linebackers coach, a cornerbacks coach, a safeties coach, a quarterbacks coach, a tight ends coach, a wide receivers coach, a running backs coach, and a offensive line coach. And that's just how you build things, especially in this world where, we've been throwing this out there for a while and they still haven't done it, but maybe lifting how many coaches can be out there. You can get a little bit more creative with your staff if they if they raise the number of assistant coaches you can have and whatnot. You can get a little more creative with your staff. So I am wondering, in a world where offensively, these quarterbacks, I don't care who the quarterbacks coach is, they're coming here because Ryan Day exists. So you can get creative with what position group your coordinator works with. He put Chip Kelly with the quarterbacks because it's a new quarterback and it's a new thing that they were doing in college football with the helmets. It just made sense to just put him at quarterbacks coach. I don't know if Ryan Day's always going to go that route. Lincoln Riley doesn't. Lincoln Riley doesn't have quarterbacks coaches. He's just a quarterbacks coach along with being a head coach. So that option is still out there. So and that's something we can't ask today, but it's probably worth asking Ryan Day at some point of, hey, did you like this structure of how things worked this year where you were the head coach, you had a offensive coordinator / quarterbacks coach, and you had a defensive head coach who was literally, his job is to just oversee everything. It's not about him being a linebackers coach and a coordinator. No. We have a linebackers coach. We have a cornerbacks coach. We have a safeties coach. We have a defensive line coach. Your job as a coordinator is to oversee all of that and implement my vision.
It is funny. Within 24 hours of Jim Knowles news of Jim Knowles going to Penn State breaking, we've had Leonard and the Broncos come out and say that he's staying put. We've also had Indiana extend defensive coordinator Brian Haynes. Like you go through a lot of the hot boards that people have published in the last 24 hours, and both those names are on most of them. And these teams are quickly being like, "Nope, he's not leaving."
Yeah, didn't Indiana they gave Brian Haynes a contract extension like immediately, right?
Yeah, it was maybe like 2 hours after I published on like the hot board.
Penn State has opened the Pandora's box, and now all these people are getting paid because they know. Because people are like, "No, Brian, no, Brian."
It's
DC. You can't have him.
We should just do. What was the tree that we did last year where it was like? Was it Carlos Loughlin that we talked about? Carlos.
Oh yeah, we can definitely do that at the end of the
But you just do it instead of doing the tree of like Tony Alford leaving leads to like Hines Ward being the receivers coach at Arizona State or something like that. It's like we should just do that, but who gets paid? Like who gets promotion? Or who gets like promotions or who gets money?
When Saban retired, and people were like, this like high school like defensive backs coach ended up getting a defensive coordinator job somewhere because Saban retired.
So so what's the first string is Tom Allen leaving Penn State for Clemson. That's how this thing starts. So we'll roll from there at some point. We got a long time. I don't know when spring practice starts.
By the way, before we transition, we should mention, just because a lot of texters have asked about it, CBS has reported that Chip Kelly's getting interest from NFL. Like,
oh yeah, we were going there.
Like that's about as much as we know at the time that we're recording. Like, we kind of knew that Chip was going to get some NFL interest again. Chip Kelly's a name that seems to pop up every year places. I think the Texans and the Jaguars are the OC openings that he's been linked to the most from reports that I've seen. So some people were asking, just because, like Knowles, he wasn't at the celebration on Sunday. I think Chip's situation is a little different, just because the Knowles thing, it kind of seemed like it was basically a done deal. It was just a matter of getting the celebration over with. Knowles has been actively recruiting and like was on the road. Andrew, remind me who he was visiting the other day that we saw on social media.
Yeah, I texted this out, 614-350-3315. Brady Smeagol, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, 4-star quarterback in 2026. He just decommitted from Florida State. Interestingly enough, like right after Chip Kelly visited. So keep an eye on him. He's from California. That would make, if Ohio State does land him, that would make 2 quarterbacks committed from the state of California, because they have Brady Edmonds in 27. They have that kid in 26. So, Kelly was on the road. Kelly was not about to take another job, and that's not why he was not in attendance. I'll say
Kelly had a reason. Quarterback in California.
He had an excused absence. Knowles had an unexcused absence.
You know what happened?
However that works.
Chip Kelly probably was like, "I'm going to go home for a little bit," and Ryan went, "Hey, can you go see this quarterback while you're out there?" He's like,
"Work from home, baby.
Whatever, man. Work from home." WFH. And again, Chip Kelly is getting interest. I think with Chip Kelly, if it's NFL interest. And the whole reason why he's not the head coach at UCLA anymore is because he just got tired of what college football has become, which I think is fascinating. There are a lot of legendary college football coaches who are just, I'm out.
Yeah, you're seeing college basketball too. I mean, Jay Wright.
Yeah, they just don't want to deal with it. And that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. I'm wondering with Chip, I think his decision might come down to, does he still want to be a recruiter or not? Because everything he wants to do with football, Ryan Day lets him do. And that's just like scheme. Ryan Day worries about the college footballness of college football. So if he just doesn't want to recruit anymore, then maybe he won't be at Ohio State next year. If that he doesn't mind going and seeing Brady Smeagol out in California while he's working from home, then I think he'll be back with Ohio State next year. And plus, I think I want to say this in a way that doesn't make it seem like I'm taking a shot at Knowles, because I'm not. This is business at the end of the day. Business is business. So it's nasty, it can be annoying, and it can offend to people, but that's business at the end of the day. People have to do what's best for them. I do think Chip Kelly will handle this a little bit more delicately if he decides to leave. I don't know if he's leaving or not. If he decides to leave, just because he has a long-standing relationship with Ryan Day that surpasses just football. So it isn't just business. That's always going to be personal. So that's the difference between Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly. Is with Jim, this was a job. With Chip Kelly, this was a job with him getting a chance to work with a guy he literally raised as a football player. So it's a little bit different. He's his football dad. Football dads. It's great football. He's a football dad.
I mean, he basically said as much.
Yeah, so he's a football dad. Okay, we'll take a break, and then we'll talk about more people who are leaving because, again, a lot of things have happened while we were covering a team winning a national title because college football decided everything should be happening at the exact same time. So let's take a break, and then we'll talk about the next round of people and just how fans should feel about this round of losses to the transfer portal. Here on Buckeye Talk.
Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
Next on Metro's Nada Yada Island podcast.
I almost fainted when the 4 new bombshells arrived. 4 free Samsung Galaxy A16 5G phones at Metro.
No way.
And finding out the 4th line is free? Oh, things got heated.
That's wild. Join Metro and get 4 free Samsung 5G phones. Only at Metro.
Plus tax. Bring 4 numbers and an ID and sign up for any Metro Flex plan. Not available currently at T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means, Stefan Krajisnik, Andrew Gillis. This is essentially what the heck happened for the last 60 days while we were living at the airport because Ohio State decided to go win a national championship. Get the text 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. We were texting all this stuff out as it was happening in real time. We're not going, oh, wait, this happened. We know. We just haven't talked about it on the pod because, I mean, listen, did you want to hear about Ohio State's fifth-string quarterback hopping in the transfer portal? Or did you want to hear about the fact that Jack Sawyer just strip-sacked Quinn Ewers and went and scored a touchdown 83 yards later? I think the latter, and that's okay. 11 players this year lost to the transfer portal. Stefan. Andrew, they had 22 players lost to the transfer portal last year. So I think that in itself, does that number shock you that it's essentially like this? Before we get into some of the players who left, Andrew, were you expecting more attrition, just given maybe what they went through last year?
Maybe not in this window because I think you could see some departures maybe in the spring. But it's important to remember, 1, the rosters are expanding, and 2, Ohio State's also losing like a ton to the NFL draft. Like last year, I think there were dudes who left who went, oh, well, okay, I know where this is going. And it was a lot easier to map out a situation to leave. Like Ohio State's losing 8 defensive starters. Davison Igbinosun, Sonny Styles, and Caleb Downs are the only returnees on that starting defense. Like, I understand Edric Houston and Cade McDonald seem to have a, they seem to have that, the defensive tackle spots like locked down. But like, if you're Tywone Malone, like, why would you not give yourself a shot, right? If you're Jason Moore, why do you not think you don't have a shot? Will Smith Jr., right? Maybe one of those guys enters the portal in spring, and I don't like to speculate on guys entering the portal or say that a guy, is going to enter the portal or whatever, but like I do think that, you have to be realistic about it sometimes. But the roster's just so open right now that I just think that is part of it. So you're losing a lot, like a lot from the 2024 roster. And everybody knew that this was going to happen. So I just think that with the roster expansion and with the amount of players that you have leaving for the NFL, rooms are turning over. And it's not like rooms are turning over, but there's a clear backup in all these positions. There are spots to be had. There are spots to be won. Whereas it felt like, Steven, like I remember during spring practice last year, me and Nathan got on and we were like, well, I think we kind of know where this defense is. Like, okay, who's going to start at linebacker? Sonny Styles or CJ Hicks? That was it. It was really the only thing that we had a question about. We knew Hamilton was going to play defensive tackle. We didn't know the other linebacker next to Cody Simon. And then that was it. And now there's jobs out there. So I think that plays a part in it as well. Because a lot of times when guys transfer, sometimes a coach will have a frank conversation and say, hey, man, it's not going to work. You got to go. And then sometimes a player will say, hey, it's not going to work. I got to go. And I don't know how many of those conversations are probably happening right now because you have the roster space for it. But also You're looking at it going, okay, I can win this. I can do this.
I had that number wrong. It's 12. Hero Canoe hasn't showed up in 247's like website system yet, so it's 12 of those guys. So here are the guys and where they're headed. Aaron Nolan, he didn't play a single snap at Ohio State. He spent 1 year here. He's headed to South Carolina. Calvin Simpson-Hunt played 29 career snaps, 6 this season in 2 years. 4 tackles total in his career. He's headed to Baylor. Devin Brown, 170 total snaps in his career, 66 this season. Played 3 seasons here, was 27 to 48 for 331 and 3 touchdowns, plus a rushing touchdown, plus like 30 rushing yards. He's headed to California. Gabe Powers played 50 snaps in his career here. 29 of those came this season. He played 3 years here, 12 tackles, a TFL, a pass breakup, and a pick 6. He's headed to Kansas State. George Fitzpatrick played 99 snaps in his career. 84 of them came this year. Played 3 seasons here. 38 pass pro snaps, 1 pressure. He is also headed to Kansas State, thus completing the Will Howard trade for 2 transfer portal players to be named later. Zen Maholsky played 158 snaps this year, 260 total snaps in 4 seasons, 102 pass pro snaps. He gave up 8 pressures. He is headed home to Indiana. Mitchell Melton played 150 snaps this year, 213 over 5 years. Obviously, the first 3 years of his career here were spent dealing with a lot of injuries. Jim Knowles really liked him as a Jack prospect, but that never really turned out to be much of anything. He is headed to Virginia, so he's headed near his hometown. He's from the DMV, so he's headed to Virginia, had 15 tackles, 7 TFLs, and 3 sacks in his career. Jaden Ballard played 59 snaps this year, 250 snaps over 4 seasons, 11 catches for 177 yards and a touchdown in his career. He is headed to Wisconsin. Jaden Bonsu and Miles Walker, the safety and the offensive lineman, they spent 2 years here, didn't play a single snap in those 2 years. Miles Walker is now headed to Boise State, so he's headed to a playoff team. And Jaden Bonsu is headed to Pittsburgh. Well, not headed. The semester has started, so all these guys are there already. And then Patrick Gerd played 95 snaps over 5 years. 49 of those snaps came this year, had 2 catches for 15 yards. He does not have a new home yet. And then Hero Canoe played 229 snaps over the past 3 years, including 123 this year, had 5 total pressures in his career. He also had 14 tackles and a sack during his career. He recently went in the portal like Calvin Simpson-Hunt did after the season was over, so he does not have a new home. Yeah, those are the names, Stefan. So that's a lot of backups. That's not a lot of guys where you were expecting those guys to fight for starters. But is there a guy from that list that maybe Ohio State is going to miss in any significant capacity?
Yeah, I'd probably say Gabe Powers is maybe at the top of the list for me. He's a guy that I thought was coming along pretty well this season. He had a pretty important role on special teams. He had a pick 6 as a linebacker against Akron, maybe, yeah. It was one of those non-conference games, but I thought he was coming along pretty well. I thought he was going to have a chance in that linebackers room, even with Sonny Styles coming back. I thought Gabe had a chance along with Arvell Reese to maybe get some playing time this upcoming season. But I understand at the same time. I mean, the way Arvell Reese played this year, it's pretty clear that he's an emerging star in that room, and maybe Gabe felt he had a better opportunity going somewhere else. So he's probably the guy I circle on that list just because we saw him make an impact in the defensive snaps that he did get this year. It's probably more about the fact that the rest of the guys on this list didn't really have a huge role either. So you're kind of picking from not a great group of options, I guess. But I lean with Gabe. I thought he showed some promise, and I thought if not Knowles, then maybe some of the other coaches on staff, maybe even Day, spoke pretty highly of him in this last fall camp and going into the season. So I thought maybe he was going to have a bigger role as the year went on, as we went into next season. And I just don't think it developed that way. And I'm sure Arvell Reese probably was a big part of that. And then you take into account, Sonny's coming back and CJ Hicks is coming back. So it's like that room is not as thin maybe as we thought it was going to be if you asked us back in August.
No, plus you probably TJ Alford and Riley Pettijohn are 2 guys who I think are talented enough that at bare minimum they can be in the 2 deep. At least one of them, maybe, and one of them might be on special teams. And even I don't think CJ Hicks is going to be a linebacker next year. In fact, I'm about 80% sure he's not going to be a pure 4-2-5 linebacker next year, and I have good reason to believe that based on things I've seen with my own eyes and things I've heard with my ears, that he is not going to be a linebacker next year. So that even more hurts the depth. Even if the room has a lot of bodies in it, Stefan, it's not a lot of experience. You're talking about a guy who in his career, he's only played 50 snaps. Well, it's not like Arvell Reese has played 5,000 snaps. It's essentially the same room as it was a year ago, where you've got one guy who's played a significant amount of snaps, a second guy who has played some snaps, and then a bunch of guys who are super, super talented, but you're not necessarily sure. So you traded in at least some level of experience for uber talent, which again, hit or miss. Andrew, anybody else you want to point out?
No, I go back to Melton. I think that he's a really solid pass rusher. I think you like Hero Canoe, I think you're fine up the middle. At linebacker, there's a lot of talent, especially a lot of talent coming in with Riley Pettijohn, TJ Alford, Eli Lee. At corner, now that Davison Igbinosun's back, I think you're fine there as well. So Calvin Simpson Hunt, I'm not stressed, and I don't think fans should be stressed about, having that cornerback situation with Igbinosun, with Jermaine Matthews, and then you got some guys in the mix. You got Aaron Scott, you got Lorenzo Styles, you got Devin Sanchez. You got options there. I just go to Melton because this team's going to lose some pretty talented pass rushers. Yeah, you have Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, who you probably feel pretty good about. I just think that Mitchell Melton, he gives you that hey, this is a really fun chess piece to have for a defensive coordinator. This is a fun chess piece to have for a defense, and I just think when you can get after the quarterback like he can, I think he's a really, really good pure pass rusher. I just think as a situational guy, he could really help you. So, none of these guys that you're losing are oh my goodness, wow. You're not losing, for example, a Carnell Tate in the transfer portal, right? You're not losing oh my goodness, this is actually really going to hurt. And that's, I mean that with no disrespect to the guys that are leaving. It's just they're starters in line already for a lot of these positions. So I look at guys that can play situational roles, and I think Melton kind of fits that to a T.
I think they're going to miss Hero Canoe. I think he is the only person on this list that they're going to. He's the only guy on this list who was going to be playing starter level snaps next year, because it's defensive tackle. They rotate on the defensive tackle. And I understand Tyleek and Ty, and even Mike Hall when he was here, they played a lot of snaps. That is not ideal, having 2 or 3 guys just playing 85% of the snaps at defensive tackle. That's not the world you want to live in. And you definitely don't want to live in that world next year when your top 2 guys are a second-year guy who is a 5-star recruit who has flash, but he's still only in his second year, and he moved to defensive tackle halfway through last season. And then Cade McDonald, who is also very, very good. But you can't have those 2 playing 85% of snaps. So behind them, you have, and Stefan, obviously we'll get into this more next Monday, Jason Moore, Tywan Malone, Will Smith Jr., who hasn't played much of anything, Tywan Malone, who looked like for a lot of the last 2 years was still trying to make the transition to full-time football player. Because remember, when he came here, he was at Ole Miss playing both football and baseball at the same time. And then behind that, you've got Eric Mensah, Dominic Kirks, and then true freshman Maxwell Roy, Trajan Odom, Jarquez Carter. I don't know if Larry Johnson's going to be looking at his defensive tackle grouping at the end of the spring and be like, yeah, we got depth. So losing a depth piece at a position where in a perfect world you want to play 6, they're going to miss Hero Canoe a lot. I think that's the only one that's a big bullet to the, because you're talking about a unit that's losing as much as they do. Bringing back a guy who, even if he's only played 229 career snaps, that matters for a group like that more than it does for me, any other group in process. Anybody wants to point out, just for the sake of, I don't know, Devin Brown might be the starter in the ACC next year. Aaron Nolan's in the SEC. Anybody else want to point out?
Yeah, I guess I would mention Aaron Nolan just because, that's a talented quarterback you lose, right? And I think, Julian Sand, we all have high hopes. Tavian St. Clair, we all have high hopes. Sometimes quarterbacks don't develop as, you expect as they're rated. So anytime you lose a talented piece like that, the future, rides more now with Julian Sayin and with, guys like Tavian St. Clair than if Aaron Nolan was still in the room.
I think I would like to point out, I'm curious about Jaden Bonsu. He leaves, and Caleb Downs can erase a lot. Caleb Downs is kind of that eraser on the back end. But for a position that is losing Lathan Ransom, who is obviously very, very, very good, you need to replace him with Malik Hartford, Jalen McClain. There's less options now. I think if there's less depth there for sure, like if you have an injury or something like that. And I also look at 2026 and say, like, okay, you're going to have a new starter next to Caleb Downs in 2025. And then in 2026, what does that room look like? Is Fahim Delane ready? Is Deshaun Stewart ready? Is, Leroy Roker ready? Like there's options there. And I just think, kind of for the same points that Steven was talking about with defensive tackle, I just think that losing a safety that is a depth player, I am curious what that does to the competition and what it does to that room.
I get why he left. He's been here for 2 years and he has not seen the field once. I also think that this was a spring window because if he's a starter at Pittsburgh next year and one of their best players, then I get why he left in the winter. I just wonder if that's the perfect example of a kid who could have stayed through the spring and taken his shot. Because that's what you don't see starters in the spring. You see, okay, I'm entering year 3 or year 4 here. I haven't had a role. And the reason why I haven't had a role is because there have been established people in front of me. Let me take my shot this spring and see where it gets me. And I'm sorry. No, I missed another guy. Kojo Antwi is at Colorado State now. He is 13. People need to update their trackers. Everybody. Listen, it's too much happening in college football. Stop putting everything on top of each other. But you saw this with Keon Grays last year where it was like, okay, I'm going into year 3. The reason I haven't played is because my first 2 years here, it was Marvin Harrison Jr., it was Emeka Ibuka, it was Jackson Smith-Njigba, it was Julian Fleming. I'm probably still not going to start over those guys. But this is my chance to start setting up for my future. And then Carnell Tate and Brandon has showed up. So it's one thing to be blocked by the people older than you. It's another thing to start getting jumped by the people behind who are younger than you. And Jaden Bonsu was blocked by Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs for good reason. But also, you got Malik Hartford in your class who's already seeing the field. He started a game already. And then when Lathan Ransom didn't play against Nebraska, Stefan, they put Jalen McClain out there as a true freshman. So that's the epitome of, okay, well, I'm kind of blocked on both sides here. So this is my window this spring. Lathan is gone. Caleb's going to be a starter. But there is an open safety job. And it's between me, Malik, and Jalen McClain, most likely, unless Fahim Delane comes in here and he's the second coming of Caleb Downs or something like that. I don't know if he has to be that good to start here, but you know what I mean. Okay, this is my chance to take my shot. And then when we get to the end of April, I can sit down, have a conversation with my family, have a conversation with the coaches, and just see where I'm at and see whether it's worth me trying to take this battle into fall camp or not. I felt like he was a perfect example of a kid who could have done that. He didn't. It's fine. You're right, Andrew. It's a death hit. But also, maybe Fahim Delane's ready to go. Maybe Leroy Roker, who I've heard the name Malik Hooker when talking about him, maybe he's a guy who takes a jump as he goes through his first spring at Ohio State. It's a depth hit until you realize there's still 8 safeties on this roster. And some of these guys they think might be ready to take a jump in year 2. So again, I completely get why Jaden Bonsu is not here. I also would have understood if he would have waited through the spring, taken his shot, and then left after the spring. But teach his own. Make your own decisions there. The Aaron Nolan one's going to be we're going to be keeping an eye on Nebraska. We're going to be keeping an eye on South Carolina. We're going to be keeping an eye on Ohio State. Right, Stefan? We're just going to be keeping an eye on all these quarterbacks and trying to figure out whether Ohio State made the right decision with the 2024 quarterback situation. But that is what it is. Let's take our last break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the players Ohio State did get in the transfer portal here on Buckeye Talk. So while Ohio State lost 13 players to the transfer portal, they did bring in 6 people from the transfer portal. And a lot of these players are guys that you think are plug and play, but there's also a couple who are maybe more depth pieces to what Ohio State wants to do. Max Clare, the tight end from Purdue, C.J. Donaldson, the running back from West Virginia, Ty Howard, the linebacker from Duquesne. When I was a kid, Stefan, I used to call it Duquesne all the time. Because when I was a kid, I was one of those kids when I was younger who pronounced every single letter in a word. So it wasn't until I was like 10 when someone who I knew ended up playing basketball at Duquesne, and they were like, dude, it's Duquesne. Stop saying Duquesne. What are you doing? Logan George from Idaho State, Ethan Owenyawa from Rice, and Phillip Daniels from Minnesota. Stefan, how many guys – I don't want to ask you that question. I'll just say, who's the most intriguing prospect of that list for you?
Most intriguing, I think, is, and I'm going to ask you again how to pronounce his name. Ethan Owenyawa.
Yeah.
I think he's the most intriguing prospect because he's coming from a program in Rice where he hasn't played, the highest level of competition, but everything he did there suggests that he's pretty dominant. Played close to 2,300 career snaps, allowed less than 100 pressures, allowed 14 sacks. I think this past year it's 10 pressures and 1 sack and 539 snaps. Like, he has been about as dominant as you could ask a guy to be. And I'm intrigued to see how that translates to this next level because he's got a lot of the physical traits, right? Like, he fits the mold of being a good tackle in the Big Ten. Now we want to see it in action. So I think he's one of those guys that we penciled in as a starter when we did our two deep for the offense the other day. I think he's got potential to be what Ohio State needs at left tackle as you move on from Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons. So I want to see it in action now. I want to see him make that jump because not only are you being asked to play against Big Ten competition consistently, you're being asked to do it every week now. You're being asked to, be part of a potential playoff run where you're facing an SEC team, a Big Ten, number one team in the country, another SEC team, a team like Notre Dame. You're playing the best competition basically from like late September through late January every single week outside of the bye weeks. And I want to see how he makes that jump because he's got all the numbers, all the physical traits to make you think, yeah, this shouldn't be much of a problem. I'm intrigued to see it play out because I think he can be an all Big Ten level tackle.
2,249 total snaps in his career, 1,342 pass blocking snaps, 91 pressures. But he took a significant jump this past year because in his first 2 years, in 2022, his first year as a starter, 481 pass blocking snaps, he gave up 37 pressures and 8 sacks. In 2023, 511 pass blocking snaps, 45 pressures, 5 of them were sacks. This past season, 350 pass blocking snaps. Rice throws the ball a lot. Only 9 pressures and only 1 of them was a sack. I'm going to bring up another guy's pre-Ohio State numbers for you.
I wonder which guy that's going to be.
It's going to be Paris Johnson. In his lone year as a starter at San Diego State, 404 pass blocking snaps, 24 pressures allowed, 4 of them were sacks. In his first year as Ohio State starting with left tackle, 444 pass blocking snaps, 15 pressures, 1 of them was a sack. And then he only played 306 snaps this year before he got hurt. 158 pass blocking snaps. He gave up 1 pressure. And he didn't give it up until the Oregon game, which, of course, was also the first game they played a defensive line with any level of post, and it was one of the best defensive lines in the country. But still, only 1 pressure in 23 snaps and 10 pass blocking snaps. I don't remember what pod I said it on, but I said, I'm not going to do the thing this year where we spend the entire offseason just hyping everybody up, just for the sake of headlines. I am going to have rationale, expectations, rationale conversations. You guys can do whatever you want. If you guys want to come on here and be hyperbolic, by all means, I will give you the runway to do so. I am choosing not to do that simply because we have had multiple texters tell us that the beat likes to do that a lot. And then when guys don't live up to expectations, we're like, well, how come you didn't do this? Well, they never said they were going to do that. So I'm not going to do it. But Josh Fryer just turned Josh Simmons into a potential first-round draft pick. And he wasn't even playing left tackle until he got to Ohio State. And Josh Simmons is 6'5", 310 pounds. Ethan Owenyawa is 6'6", 345 pounds, and we have been seeing him walk around at some of these bowl games. He looks 6'6", 345 pounds.
No, he doesn't. He looks 6'9" and 400 pounds.
He's
one of the biggest human beings I've ever seen in my life.
The only offensive lineman I've ever seen that was larger than him with my own two eyes in person was DeJuan Jones. And that's because DeJuan Jones is Shaquille O'Neal in pads. We saw what Josh Fryer could – not Josh Fryer. Well, him too. He was pretty good. What Justin Frye could do with a guy who was coming from a lower-level school who had never really had the resources and the development that Ohio State can give a kid, and what he did with Josh Simmons. Is Ethan Owenyawa Ohio State's next Josh Simmons?
He certainly can be. I think the potential is there. I'll put it like that. Because, I think Stefan is right when he says you're curious about coming from like a lower level of competition and a lower level of play because, you can dominate, but, I'll put it like this. Would you guys or would any of the fans want to make a living of Ohio State's left tackle just being a G5 guy that you go pluck every year? Maybe not. Like ideally, you're like, hey, let's get a 5-star as our left tackle. Like, let's get somebody as our tackle here that works. Or, maybe it's not even a Josh Simmons. Maybe it's just he's solid. But like we were talking about Josh Simmons is like, this guy might be a first-round pick. And now it's, it's like, I don't know if, first-round pick is definitely going to happen. I don't want to say that like, oh, well, he's obviously this big. That means he's good. That's not the way that offensive lines work. I think it certainly helps. I think you watch his film and you see athleticism, which is, a little bit surprising for somebody who's that big. But, when you look at him, I think it's Onyenwa too. I think it's Onyenwa. I'm not quite sure. We're going to have to get a pronunciation check from him.
I think it's honestly said directly how it's spelled. Onyenwa.
But
yeah.
I think he certainly can be. That's the answer to the question. The potential is there, and the potential might be there to be a higher ceiling Josh Simmons, maybe. I think the ceiling might be higher, just because that size is there and that athleticism is there. He's played left tackle before, whereas Josh Simmons was coming in having not played left tackle. Like Josh Simmons was coming in as San Diego State's right tackle. So it was like, oh boy. And even then, if you remember, the first couple games of Josh Simmons' career here were not all that great. The Indiana game was not that good for the offensive line. I don't think they blocked all that well against Notre Dame in 2023. It took kind of midway through the year and towards the end of the year for that line to really start to get together. And Simmons was a big part of that. So he can absolutely be that. We'll find out. If first round pick is something that he can reach. But I think it is important just to have him just be fine. If you don't get 2 tackle transfers, your tackles, I mean, maybe George Fitzpatrick or Zen Michalski don't leave, but maybe those are your 2 tackles, Zen Michalski and George Fitzpatrick. And I don't think people are feeling very confident about that room. So, you needed just something there. You needed, even if you get a guy who's like, hey, we'll take a 6th round pick on this guy because he's the biggest human being I've ever seen. Why not? Even if you just get that type of guy who's like NFL adjacent, who can kind of hang around a little bit, is, a solid enough left tackle, that's huge considering where they were potentially coming from. So I think his ceiling is very high, but I don't even know if it super matters if he hits his ceiling. I just think you want him to be really solid. And if you get solid, I think you're feeling pretty good about, where that left tackle position is going to be, assuming he does indeed play left tackle, because it sounds like Daniels is going to be right tackle.
Just for the sake of mentioning him, Philip Daniels, last year at Minnesota, 158 pass blocking snaps, 9 pressures in his career there. And I know, go listen to the Monday pod. Stefan and I had a long conversation about Philip Daniels and while we think he might be starting right tackle, we're on the lookout for Ian Moore as well. So we won't repeat a lot out there. Back to Onyala. Hot take. I don't mind this approach. Like, to the question of, Ed, do you really want to be living in a world where you're going to get a G5 guy as your offense? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not saying it should be your bread, but yes, you need to recruit the position.
Yeah, fans listening to this would obviously look. You'd rather have David Sanders Jr. as your left tackle in a few years, right? Like, I get it.
With that being said, offensive line is a developmental position. So, if David Sanders Jr. had committed to Ohio State and signed with Ohio State instead of Tennessee, he's not their starting left tackle in 2025. So you still would have had to go to the transfer portal and get a guy like Ethan. So I don't hate this approach with offensive line because it is a developmental position. Because it's not necessarily the position where it's plug and play with young guys. Now, like Caden Proctor. But also, that's because Alabama missed on some offensive line recruits. That's part of the reason why. I'm thinking about DeJuan Jones. And I remember Greg Shadrawa telling Doug back in 2019 that if he hits, he's a first-round draft pick. DeJuan Jones ended up being a fourth-round draft pick after being a 2-year starter at Ohio State, where Ohio State literally reshuffled its offensive line randomly like 2 weeks in the fall camp of 2021 because this dude had to get on the field. And he was a fourth-round draft pick because he was awesome at the Senior Bowl, and then I felt like he just kind of whiffed on the momentum there and didn't continue to capitalize on it, and so he fell in the draft a little bit. I mean, DeJuan Jones didn't start until year 3 at Ohio State. So I am wondering here, what if DeJuan Jones, who was a very, very, very lowly rated guy, I think he was outside the top 1,000, what if he had just gone to a G5 school or a lower end Power 4 school? And Ohio State would have gotten him out of the transfer portal heading into 2021, 2 years after he had been in college football. Would people have been excited about DeJuan Jones as a transfer? Probably not. You'd be like, why'd you go get this kid who's been at Indiana State or I'm trying to not use Indiana, Stefan, out of respect for you on this pod. But you know what I mean? Like the lower level, like Indiana was a lower level Power 4 school at that point. What if you'd have gotten him in 2021 and you said that's going to be our starting right tackle? People would have been like, what the heck, man? Why are you bringing that guy in? How come Greg Shadrawa can't recruit the position? And then, I don't know, by game 4, you're like, oh, okay, well, DeJuan Jones is pretty good. DeJuan Jones in 2021, 468 pass blocking snaps. He gave up 11 pressures, only 3 sacks. In 2022, his second year as a starter, 419 pass blocking snaps, gave up 5 pressures, no sacks. I think that's what Ethan Onyala is. Seriously, he's just a guy he's DeJuan Jones who didn't sign with Ohio State out of high school because he went to a lower level school. And so he comes here, unlike DeJuan when he took over in 2021, he had played 90 and 80 snaps his first 2 years. Ethan comes here having played 2,200 snaps. So I don't hate this. In the world of the transfer portal, when guys are in and off your roster and you're trying to retain guys, yes, you should keep trying to go get the 5-star recruit. You should keep going to try to get the top 100 recruit. But also, it does seem like offensive linemen are a little less likely to leave home, or at least the region of the country they're from, which is why it's so important that Ohio State lock up its offensive line class in 2026, Andrew, when it seems like there's a lot of in-state guys they could get. But if you are getting top-tier guy every so often, if you're locking up your backyard and then you're offsetting some of that with a guy with this profile who's got 2,000 snaps to his name, I don't think it matters as much where he's coming from, Stefan. Maybe I'm off base. Maybe that's too hot of a take and people are going, shut up, Steven. We want the 5 stars. But I don't think, with offensive line being as developmental as it is, I am more concerned about, he's played over 2,000 snaps as a starter at left tackle than I am, he's coming from Rice.
Yep, I don't disagree with that. I'm confident that he's going to be good. I'm just kind of nitpicking at this point of why maybe he won't be.
You're nitpicking the national champs. I get it.
Exactly. What I will say is, I think what maybe makes Ohio State intriguing for some of these transfers and why maybe the transition won't be as difficult for some players coming to Ohio State as opposed to other programs is Ohio State has shown in year one that they've nailed down how to handle getting players ready for a 16, 17 game season, which I think makes it a lot easier when you get to the Michigan game and you're like, man, I've been playing, oh my God, another Big Ten opponent with another good defensive line. Like maybe you don't feel it as much now because Ohio State has kind of mastered this formula of how to have guys, ready to go. Now, obviously, Josh Fryer was playing through some things. It's, with offensive linemen, it's a lot more difficult to manage that than it is with defensive linemen or with receivers or whoever it may be, right? It's a lot more difficult. But I think we see Ohio State kind of has this formula where I think maybe Ethan can be in a favorable spot for it being his first season in Big Ten play.
Andrew, anybody you want to mention?
Max Clare is I think the next obvious choice. I mean, the tight end from Purdue. Like he might be the most talented tight end in the last couple of years for Ohio State. Like I think he's probably more talented than Cade Stover. I think he's more talented than G. Scott. It's just I think I'm very interested to see what happens here with him because we talk about this offense being like, hey, you don't need to, run it through the tight ends because you've got war machines at receiver. Okay, well, you just went out and got the top-ranked tight end in the portal, and I don't think that they just went, well, let's just get the top-ranked tight end in the portal and let's, go lure him in and let's, really try to recruit him and let's do everything we can for NIL and everything like that and then just say, yeah, who cares? We don't need him. Like, they have a plan for him, I'm sure of it, and I want to know what it is because we haven't seen the tight end really featured in Ohio State. What does that look like? How does he fit into an offense that has the best receiver in college football, another potential first-round pick in Carnell Tate, and then Brandon Inniss stepping into a role? Like, how does he fit into that plan? Very interesting.
Cade Stover had 41 catches for 576 yards.
Yeah,
and
also Emeka was hurt for a lot of that.
Right.
And Julian Fleming was their third receiver. And you might be able to make the case that this receiving core, even with Inniss, is better than that 2023 room. And you have Jeremiah Smith, who is probably going to be better than what Marv's peak was. So
right, but the question you asked was, how does a tight end get featured in an offense that features the best wide receiver?
People get hurt? Is that the answer?
Yeah. In 2022, Cade Stover was still third in receptions. He had 36 catches for 406 yards and 5 touchdowns. Right now, we all think that this is the best wide receiver trio in college football, right? I don't even know if that's really up for debate. You got the man-child, Carnell Tate, and then Brandon Inniss, who was a former 5-star recruit who probably would have done more for you at Emeka Egbuka had not gotten hurt in 2023 and went pro. But where we sit right now, this is very, very similar to going into 2023. You've got two very established guys, a tight end who can be a pretty good pass catcher, and a former 5-star recruit as your third guy who is an idea but not a reality yet. Brandon is, I think, no more established than Julian Fleming was in 2023 right now. Do I think his ceiling is higher? Yes, I do, 100%. But right now, where things stand, I don't think the description of Ohio State's top 3 passing weapons at wide receiver and tight end are all that different, Stefan, than where they were in 2023. You have the best wide receiver in the country, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith, another first-round draft pick, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, a pass-catching tight end, Cade Stover, Max Clare, and another wide receiver who has a lot of upside. We just haven't had a chance to really see it yet for one reason or another, in Julian Fleming and Brandon Inniss. A lot could change between there and then. But I understand why you went with him because Max Clare has 73 catches for 881 yards and 4 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He is not going to have 73 catches next year. I don't think he's going to have 50 catches. In fact, Stefan, we talked about this on Monday. I'm not going to be shocked if his stat line looks very similar to G. Scott's stat line this year. And it has nothing to do with him and his ability. It's just there's a hierarchy of who deserves the ball. And you start naming guys, and all of a sudden the tight end goes down to 4, 5, 6 real quickly here.
Yeah, I think what's intriguing is just I think he's a more talented version of G. Scott, right? I think Andrew alluded to that a bit. So there is potential to use him in different ways. I think you're basically taking what G. Scott is and putting in a slightly better version of it.
Yeah.
And it might not lead to much different production, but maybe defense is viewed as more of a threat.
TreVeyon Henderson had 27 catches this year, and G. Scott had 27 catches this year. TreVeyon Henderson in 2021 had 27 catches. Ohio State's tight end number 1, Jeremy Ruckert, had 26 catches. TreVeyon Henderson, while obviously dealing with some injuries, had only 4 catches in 2022. Mayan Williams had the most of any running back. He had 5 catches. Cade Stover had 36 catches. 2023, as we kind of just mentioned a minute ago, Cade Stover had 41 catches. TreVeyon Henderson had 19 catches. So that wasn't. So I think it's less about the receiver and more about the running back. How involved is Ohio State's running back in the passing game? Because it does seem like there's 55 catches out there for whoever is tight end 1/running back. What's the split between those two? We've seen years where it's been an equal split. We've seen years where the tight end has dominated that split. And so some of this is a James Peoples conversation. How much is he involved? Which is why I wanted to mention C.J. Donaldson here and what his role potentially looks like as a guy who was at one point in his career tight end and transferred over to running back. I just want to see what that dynamic looks like with him and James Peoples and Bo Jackson and Isaiah West and Turbo Rogers, and how Carlos Loughlin wants to deploy his room wide. It seems like Ty Howard and Logan George are more, Andrew mentioned it earlier, rosters are expanding, so those seem like more depth pieces in comparison to like Keenan Nelson Jr., who is on this roster right now. He transferred from South Carolina last year, and Aaron Nolan completed that trade with Keenan Nelson and the transfer portal player to be named later. Apparently, it was a quarterback, a former top 100 recruit quarterback at that. But Keenan Nelson's been more of a depth piece who hasn't played a lot here, and I'm wondering if that's the role of Ty Howard and Logan George. Get the text 614-350-3315. Those are the newcomers and the outgoers of Ohio State and just the stuff that was happening while the Buckeyes were busy trying to win a national championship. We were texting that information out as it was happening, but this is really the first time we've gotten a chance to sit down and actually talk about it on the pod. Tomorrow, Andrew and I are just going to check in on some recruiting stuff and see what's happening and what's not happening as Ohio State faces all of its focus towards the 2026 recruiting class. And I sent Andrew and Stefan an idea for this week, but I also don't really feel like thinking that much more any week, so I might just change it and have the texters send in some questions and we answer that just to get the texters more involved. So get the text 614-350-3315. That is our checkpoint. I don't know where to go. Just checking in on the Ohio State football program, the national championship Buckeyes. Spring practice is closer than you possibly think it is. So for Andrew Gillis and Stefan Krajisnik, I'm Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.